All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the first of our four-part webinar series, Cooling Conversations. Today's topic is measuring what matters, satellites, sensors, and social experiences of heat. We'll be getting started in just a minute. My name is Eliza Amstutz, and I manage heat monitoring campaigns at Kappa Strategies. Kappa is a community-focused climate adaptation consultancy based in Portland, Oregon. So before we begin, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. As you're listening to our panel of speakers, feel free to put any questions you might have in the Q&A section. This is at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a talk bubble icon with a question mark inside and a Q&A label. So please put your questions for our panelists here. And as we go through the webinar, you're welcome to read through the Q&A questions and upvote any questions you might find interesting. Feel free to use the chat as well to share comments and resources. Just note that we will not be monitoring the chat for Q&A questions. So now I would like to introduce our facilitator for today, Vivek Shandas. Vivek is a climate researcher, educator, and the founder of Kappa. He'll serve as our facilitator for the discussion today, introducing our speakers, moderating questions, and integrating key lessons from the presentations. So Vivek, I will pass it to you now.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thanks so much, Eliza. I hope you all can hear me okay. Yeah, I'm really delighted to welcome you all to Kappa's first webinar series. This is occurring one of the hottest months of the year in the Northern Hemisphere anyway. And Kappa's hosted hundreds of calls with organizers of heat campaigns, workshops, and this one's really special to me, and I think the Kappa team. Rather than guiding hundreds of volunteers in using mobile sensors and navigating cities and providing high-resolution maps and other analyses, we've got a chance to learn from some amazing thought leaders who have been examining the distribution of heat on the ground. So the real emphasis of these webinars focuses on this heat action planning model that the Kappa team developed, and it contains four essential components: a hazard assessment component starting in about 11 o'clock on this graphic up here, to a community engagement component, to intervention strategies, and then implementation guidance. Over a decade of doing this heat monitoring work, one thing we found is that these are essential components for engaging decision makers, researchers, residents in heat management. And we've learned that these are the foundations for effectively addressing rising temperatures and safeguarding lives, livelihoods, and the infrastructure on which we depend. I'm thrilled to introduce you to our first group of speakers who will shed light on one of these components, the hazard assessment component. And we'll begin with Christian Brainin in a minute, though, just to touch on the other sessions that will be happening throughout the month of July. While we start with the hazard assessment today, we're going to be moving to community engagement next week, and we'll have a slide at the end of this to tell you who's presenting at that, and then intervention strategies the week after on the 24th, where we're looking at heat management platforms, and then to close the month out, and implementation guidance, really looking at policy and policy evaluation and capacity assessment. So it's a really well-rounded interdisciplinary approach to addressing this very complex issue of heat planning, heat management, heat action plan. Lauren Smalls-Manty, who is our next presenter. Lauren's a senior environmental systems analyst with New York City's health department. Lauren has over a decade of experience in public and private sector. Lauren has explored the connections of climate, health, equity, and policy. And previously, as part of New York City Parks, she served as the Urban Heat Resilience Project Manager for the Cooling Neighborhoods Initiative, which is really relevant to our conversation here. Lauren holds a BS in Chemical Engineering from Baltimore from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and has a master's degree in environmental science and a PhD in environmental engineering with a focus on climate change adaptation and mitigation and water resources from Drexel University. So, Lauren, really excited and grateful for your presence here today. I'll hand the stage over to you.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I'll just share my screen. Mm. Are you seeing the right screen?
Next slide visible there, but
Okay,
there you go.
should
Great.
be great. All right. So as stated before, my name is Lauren Smeltmonte. I work at the New York City Health Department and the Bureau of Environmental Surveillance and Policy. And today I just wanted to go over one of the air temperature monitoring campaigns that we completed from 2018 and 19. However, the implications and effects and even some of the monitoring still exists today. So I'll just get right into it. So in 2017, the city put out the Cool Neighborhoods NYC report, and that was basically a comprehensive and mayoral initiative that combined both adaptation and mitigation measures to help solve the issue of urban heat in New York City. So part of the initiatives in the Cool Neighborhoods NYC was to do some baseline temperature monitoring and really look at the hyper local impacts temperature distribution in the city. And so this was a cross agency initiative. So it's both with parks, New York City Health, and the New York City Mayor's Office of Recovery and Resiliency, which is now termed the New York City Climate and Environmental Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. So it was based on a urban heat island working group and also the New York City Heat Vulnerability Index that was developed at the New York City Health Department. And our heat vulnerability index is combined of both social and environmental factors. It is a measure of the risk of heat-related illness or death during extreme heat. So it involves both as I mentioned before, both social and environmental aspects as listed here. And you can see on the map, the distribution around the city varies from low to high heat vulnerabilities. And our sites, which are outlined in Black, span most of the medium to high heat vulnerable neighborhoods. So, some of our initial research goals was to create a baseline measurement around New York City in these high to heat vulnerable neighborhoods. And maybe in a decade or so, we can go back and monitoring. And this was done in conjunction with the tree planting that was a part of the Cool Neighborhoods funding that Parks was doing in these neighborhoods. We also wanted to do some modeling and ground truth some of the previous models and the future models that we have been doing. And we wanted to more explicitly link land use and block to block temperature variations. So the idea was to deploy about 500 air temperature sensors on trees and lampposts throughout the cities and the neighborhoods identified. And so we use these Hobo, and you'll see pictures of the sensors as we go throughout the presentations. We use Hobo tidbits. They're very small circular sensors, and they had a back on it to prevent any type of radiation or heat affecting the sensor. And they also had a sensor cover. And we validated the sensor measurements with a host of weather stations already located in New York City. So this was a large feat, and so it involved a lot of organization. So this is an example of how or how I deployed the sensors. I leaned a lot on the city staff at Parks. So we have foresters who go out every day and do what the foresters do. And they were graciously devoted some times, 2 days, to help me install the sensors. I also had co-workers from work in both the health department and mayor's office who also volunteered to help deploy the sensors, but we were able to get it done within 2 days. We used the Fulcrum app. So, what really helped is being organized in the beginning. So, we needed ladders and tape measures because we also did survey of the trees. Um, we did both installations with zip ties and with nails, depending on the width of the tree. And we used a Fulcrum app in order to keep track of where we were locating the sensors, and also to complete a survey at the end relating to the infrastructure surrounding the tree or the actual tree itself. And then, sometimes technology fails us. So we also had paper copies of where the temperature sensors should be located and their designated numbers. So we installed the sensors on a wide variety of types of trees because we had plans to do some research with the in conjunction with the urban field station in New York City, which is where I was working out of at the time, to do some in-depth tree studies. And so this is a distribution of some of the various types of trees that are located in the neighborhoods where we installed some of the sensors, which really helped in um, with parks because they were looking at their planting palette at the time. So some of the results. So you could see that air temperature variability in the neighborhoods differ. You can see in the northern parts of New York City, it's cooler, and also in the eastern parts. But you also see variability within the neighborhoods itself, located at the far right of block to block air temperature difference. And we wanted to get quantify this impact. And so generally, the graph on the left shows air temperature differences, which are normalized, but it shows the different neighborhoods that we monitor. And you can see again, the Eastern Queens has very low temperatures in the overnight periods. Also, the upper New York. However, your hottest areas are in New York, and closer in Western Queens towards the center. And you have some variability as you go throughout the Bronx as well. So we use the baseline air temperature data to do a number of things, as I mentioned before, that extends even now. One of the first applications of the baseline data was to validate our NICAS temperature data. Our NICAS suite are a suite of air quality sensors that are located throughout our city that also collect temperature. We wanted to see if those were accurate temperatures, and so we were able to draw correlations between those the NICAS temperatures and our baseline air temperatures, because we previously published a map of air temperature in New York City based on the NICAS data. We also partner with NYCHA to be involved in their urban forest survey. So they completed an urban forest report, and we looked at differences between inside NYCHA campuses where they have large tree clusters, and outside NYCHA campuses where you had tree clusters lined along the streets. And we found that really those aggregate formations, we were able to quantify how much aggregate formation of trees reduces air temperatures compared to outside in the neighborhoods. We were also able to complete some land use modeling, and we had 2 papers coming out regarding this. So we were able to look at the connectedness of the street trees, and and quantify the temperature reduction. And then we also develop data stories to create an easy to understandable way of how urban heat island impacts the city using the data. So if you go on the data story page, you're able to see and based on the percentage of trees in your neighborhood, the air temperature reduction. Oh, and just to mention, we actually use the eco stress data that was previously talked about to do like a surface temperature and air temperature comparisons with the nighttime data and with the daytime data, and we also use it to look at moisture and within the city as well. So it is a good data set. So again, I would like to thank all the foresters, interns, and analysts. And please feel free to email if you have any questions relating to this.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lauren. You can stop sharing. Yeah. Thanks so much. That's interesting. So we're going from space to on the ground, like over, 2 miles or several miles down onto the ground. And I'm curious. It's a huge effort to pull this off. And New York City is no small place. So in trying to understand kind of the effort it took to pull this off, is this something you would suggest others take part in? And I ask in part because you were, as I remember, we in our conversations, you were the person like going out there and putting along with volunteers and others. Like, how much of an effort is this to actually go out and set up, deploy a whole 500 plus air temperature sensors? And I really kind of want to get it. Was it worth it?
I think it was worth it for our applications in New York City. I don't know if, we're not doing it in the near future. I think that you could do it in smaller campaigns. So we've actually in subsequent years done smaller campaigns. So like Niger was a smaller campaign. We are this summer we're doing where they have pop up cooling uh, tents. We're doing some sensors in the surrounding area and inside the tent to see those impacts, and also where we have some mist installations and stuff. We do some temperature installations. I don't necessarily think it should be on on such a grand scale because it is a lot of effort and it requires a lot of people. We as New York City had the workforce to do it. I understand, smaller cities. It's okay to start out small and maybe not as close. We did block to block. It doesn't have to be block to block. It can be a larger width, and then also use the. You can now use the satellite data that was previously talked about to help do those links, so you don't have to do it as often. We were really interested in continuous data, and so that was the benefit for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Just one more quick question. How do you think, can you characterize like before this effort and after this effort, if you were to think about the level of seriousness that decision makers had around heat and the level of actionable steps that they were thinking about locally, how do you characterize like what difference it made? Like when you suddenly went out and said, "Oh wow, look at this! It varies, and even within one borough of New York, it varies quite a bit. Even within one few blocks, it varies." Like, how curious were your thoughts on how this changed the perspective of local folks that you were working with?
Yeah, so I think it did have an impact, although like this was birthed out of a whole urban heat island working group and it was a mayoral initiative. So there was already interest there. I think it pushed other initiatives. So while we were also doing outdoor, we were doing some indoor temperature measurements. We were doing some energy measurements. And still today, we use the data collectively that we collect. And it also allowed us to, in subsequent years, partner with other agencies to do temperature measurements on their campus to advocate for certain things. So I think the branches or the extension was one of the things that we've been able to accomplish after has been worth the effort, this initial effort, and has captured, and because we were able to actually quantify, so now we're able to say, like, the differences between neighborhood is this, then that has really pinpointed the need for certain pinpointed efforts in various neighborhoods.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. So the effort, so the juice was, the squeeze was worth the juice.
Yeah, but again, like, it was a lot of work. But again, I had a lot of help. I had a lot of help, and we're actually, I forgot to mention, like, we're doing trees count again. So I know, so every 10 years they do a trees count, and so the parks is doing another trees count this year. So it it fosters stewardship and participation when regular citizens. I was able to get actual city workers involved in this, so that is worth it as well, so they actually see that applied science to some of our efforts.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to come back to this little, there's a theme about like municipal folks working on a project and then what that means in terms of what residents expect of the municipality to then act on as a result of these findings. So I want to come back to that after Jenna and Amy's presentation, because they're also representing a municipality or a region, a county. And so I want to come back to that if you want to just think about that a little bit. But thanks, Lauren. This is really, really insightful. Took us right to the ground. So we're going to continue with on the ground perspective with Jenna and Amy. I want to just shift us over then to a county perspective where I have the privilege of hearing from Jenna Kay and Amy Wilson. So go ahead and just introduce them and then turn it over to them. Jenna, who just came on the screen, is a land use and environmental professional with expertise at the intersection of science and decision making. With a graduate degree in city planning and having worked in the energy sector, Jenna serves as a planner in Clark County, Washington. Current projects aim to integrate climate change into comprehensive planning using collaborative approaches that promote environmental justice. And then Jenna's going to be co-presenting with Amy, who is also on the screen. Amy Wilson is an epidemiologist with Clark County Public Health, Clark County, Washington. Her work involves data monitoring and analysis of the health impacts of climate and environmental issues, including heat, air quality, and water quality. Amy has worked in governmental and academic public health settings with experiences in health research, epidemiology, program coordination, and evaluation. She has an undergraduate degree in public health and a master's of an undergraduate degree in public health and a master's of public health and epidemiology. So Jenna, Amy, let me turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for having us. Again, I'm Jenna, and I'll be presenting with my colleague, Amy, and we're going to share what we've been working on related to measuring community impacts from climate hazards in Clark County, Washington. For some context, Clark County is a county of about 500,000 people in Southwest Washington. We are just across the Columbia River from Portland, Oregon, and are part of the Portland metro area. And like the rest of the Pacific Northwest, summers have historically been quite mild here. However, that has been changing. So for our presentation, we're going to give you a little bit of background on the project we have been working on, talk about the development of some survey questions and the outreach we did to collect some survey responses, and then dive into a little bit about what we found in our results and the implication and next steps. So the county project we've been working on, as Vivek mentioned, was to we work on implementing new Washington state climate change planning legislation, where we have been tasked by the state legislature to integrate climate planning into our comprehensive plan. And this project includes resilience planning, among some other things as well. And extreme heat is one of 7 climate hazards that are predicted to get worse in our county and are on our list of hazards that we need to be planning for. So the graphic on this slide illustrates the extreme heat projection for our county under a business as usual scenario, where in the coming decades, we're expecting to see many more days over 90 degrees. And as part of this project and part of our public engagement work, we developed and deployed 2 resilience-related surveys. The first survey focused on exploring climate impacts and understanding community member experiences with past impacts from severe weather. And the second survey focused on climate action ideas for community resilience. In both of these surveys, they were a combination of resilience-related questions and demographic questions, and both surveys also included a mix of quantitative and qualitative questions. We had 4 groups of people weigh in and help shape the survey questions that we asked through an iterative process. So we had the project long-range planning staff weighing in on the questions, really focused on the key types of information we felt like we needed in order to do the planning work that we needed to do under this new legislation. And then we had our public health colleagues review draft questions, and they provided feedback focusing on things like question structure, format, and other information they thought might be nice to have and collect for data analysis later on. And CAPA strategy staff also reviewed draft questions, making sure that what we were doing was consistent with best available science, and they were able to share suggestions based on their experiences working in other communities. And our fourth group is what we called the Environmental Justice Coalition, or EJC for short. And this was a group of 15 community-based organizations who serve community members at higher risk to climate impacts, all working in our county. And the county hired these 15 organizations to help us with our community engagement work as part of this project. And so this group, when we were in the process of developing survey questions, they really helped us review the questions through an equity lens, thinking about the communities that they work with and would be engaging with to help collect feedback. And just a few examples of some of the types of feedback that we got from that group and how it helped shape the questions that we asked. They honed in on the wording and phrasing of all of the questions, and we had several questions, related to asking how people had been impacted in the past by certain hazards, and they really pushed that we reframe those questions to ask about how people's families had been impacted because they thought that resonated better with the communities that they work with. We also have an example where, although cold weather is not projected to generally get worse here in the Pacific Northwest over time, we had a really hard time talking about heat or other types of severe weather without cold coming up. And based on our discussions with the EJC organizations, we felt like it was really important to add questions related to cold into our surveys. And we also thought we could probably learn something about heat and other types of severe weather by including these questions related to severe cold weather. And then we also added and modified several of our demographic questions based on this group's feedback, really listening to them on what they thought was important to track and be able to see in the data that we collected. So we thought we'd share just a couple of examples off of our surveys to provide a flavor to you all. We will make sure we include a link to our project webpage that has a report that includes, full copies of the surveys. And we're sharing snapshots from our paper surveys, though we also had online versions as well. We just want to highlight how low tech our approach was with this work. And so this first example here, this question is asking about categories of how community members have been impacted by severe weather events in the past. And you can see the really hot weather heat wave is on the list there. And our hope in writing this question was to see if there were any patterns or trends in the responses and see what stood out from the responses from the survey takers. And this type of question that let us tally or quantify responses was always followed up with open-ended questions where participants could provide more information or personal stories. And we heard a lot of personal stories through our data collection part. And then in addition to asking, how have you and your family been impacted in the past by various kinds of weather hazards, we also ask questions like, well, what helped you cope during X kind of severe weather event? And what did you need that you didn't have? And things like that. So also provided lots of opportunity for people to share stories and examples of what their experiences have been like in our community in the past. This next question here on the screen is exploring, day-to-day challenges that may compound resilience issues. And one of the pieces of the legislation we are working to implement does have a big emphasis on co-benefits, and there's a lot of environmental justice requirements in there. And we thought questions like this, followed by open-ended response questions, were a good way for us to help identify major barriers and opportunities for co-benefits when we come to thinking about possible solutions. And then finally, our third example here, this comes from our second survey, which was more focused on what should we do about the issues people have been having. This is an example where we were exploring possible planning goal ideas and concepts, and we were requesting community feedback on how they were perceiving some possible ideas. This is just showing a portion of this question. We had, 20 plus ideas that they responded to. And we set up this question structure to align well with the equity lens we were using with our project to better understand how community members perceive certain ideas as being helpful, harmful, or something else. All right, so that was a little bit about question development. I want to touch briefly on the engagement we did to collect survey responses. So this slide is including a snapshot of some of the engagement materials created by our Project Environmental Justice Coalition organizations. Between the 15 organizations and county staff, we held 69 engagement events that related to resilience. And most of the events tied to surveys in some way or other, though not all of them. We did collect feedback in other ways as well. And most of the activities were led by these community organizations. You can see if you look at some of these materials, some things were done online, some things were in person. We had organizations, talking to people individually, asking them the questions and writing down responses. We were very flexible in our approach and how we engaged with community members and collected their feedback. Surveys were available in 12 different languages. And through the engagement, we received 725 survey responses. Because we did ask a lot of demographic questions in our survey, we know that we were able to collect feedback from a diverse range of people who spoke a variety of languages, represented a variety of races, ethnicities, genders, ages, and were experiencing different financial and housing situations. So for us, we know about a third of our survey takers frequently speak a language other than English. And we know that we were able to get survey responses from people in every single zip code in our county, which includes both rural areas and urban areas. And before I pass it to Amy, we are really proud of all the work that these community organizations did and how much they helped us. And, we would not have gotten the amount of responses we got or the diverse range of people participating and taking these surveys without the help of these organizations. So Amy's going to pick it up from here.
Oh, thanks, Jenna. Hi again. I think, Jenna, you can hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Wilson again with Clark County Public Health. I'm going to talk a little bit about the results from these surveys and then sort of some next steps and how we're integrating these into our work. So from these surveys, some of the key takeaways were really hot weather or heat waves were a top concern among all respondents, unsurprisingly. Some of the most reported related impacts for heat were health problems or injuries, mental health impacts, as well as disruptions to jobs or income, school, and daycare. And there were some disparities in reported impacts to heat by things like housing status or housing situation, age, race, ethnicity, and primary languages spoken. So for example, those who did not have housing and respondents who rent their housing reported disproportionate impacts from heat compared to the rest of the survey population. And I'll also mention respondents who reported being most affected by really hot weather included households with youth, respondents identifying as Hispanic or Latino, American Indian or Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, or Middle Eastern or Northern African, and respondents who spoke a language frequently other than English. And there were also some differences in top reported hazards based on housing situation. So, for example, respondents who own their home were more concerned about wildfire smoke, and those who rented housing were more concerned about things surrounding extreme temperatures like heat and cold. And I just want to note that this is not necessarily new information, but it's consistent with the literature. And it, as Jenna mentioned, it's really important for us to hear directly from Clark County residents on these issues. Next slide, please. So respondents were asked what resources they wish they had to cope with heat. And unsurprisingly, most respondents reported air conditioning would have been helpful. Other home-related resource needs included things like fans and insulation, as well as support with electrical bills. And more community-focused resource needs included things like more cool indoor spaces and cooling centers, increased communications and alerts, and more trees and shades in their neighborhoods. And generally, respondents were supportive of most resiliency policy examples or sort of action ideas. There were several themes respondents reported that benefit people most vulnerable to climate impacts. And these were things like focused support to specific communities, improving access to community resources, things like cooling and warming centers, public transportation, healthcare, and affordable housing, outreach and education that are community and culturally specific, and also the idea of something like wellness checks, as well as meaningful community engagement, really listening and actively engaging and incorporating feedback from communities on these decisions. Next slide, please. So yeah, as mentioned, this feedback is really critical, not only to informing kind of our county comprehensive plan update, but also for our public health department. It's been really helpful in better understanding local community experiences and support needs. We are newer to climate-related public health work, so these results are a great starting point to providing direction on future questions, engagement, and programmatic priorities. Like where do we need to focus? What questions do we still have? And these resources also highlight the potential for co-benefits and overlapping solutions. So for example, as Jenna mentioned, many resilience strategies to heat, things like community spaces or communications and alerts or energy assistance, would also benefit folks who are more affected by extreme cold. Next slide, please. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and we're happy to take any questions or comments.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, Amy. Really interesting outreach. This is kind of the human side of heat and the exposure. We can look at it with machines up in the air. We can do sensors on the ground. And now it's kind of like going to people to understand what their experience and sense of heat is. I'm curious how, just a quick follow-up question, how did you, we've seen, I remember reading a report recently where some journalists went to South Asia and interviewed somebody who was in an air-conditioned office all day long, and their experience of the heat that was 115, 120 outside was very different than the outdoor day laborer who was out pedaling around and trying to sell things to folks. And so it got me thinking about kind of how did you control for like the varied experiences of heat when you do a survey like this to get a good gauge on what are the kind of experiences people are having with the heat that comes through. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can start, and Amy, feel free to add on. I mean, I think the open-ended storytelling questions were really important to complement the more quantifiable questions, because it was pretty, just reviewing the responses, you had responses from, I had a newborn in our apartment. We had good way to cool, and no friends in the area and couldn't afford to leave, like stuck, no resources, to folks who said, oh, we went to the coast for like the week to, or we rented a hotel room, to the responses where, because we had the demographic questions too, we could tell if you owned your home or had more resources, heat wasn't even showing up as a top concern. So like, I think the combination of the quantifiable and the storytelling really helped present the range of experiences and just how different, right, someone's experience to a certain weather event can be. Amy, anything you want to add?
The only thing I'll add is I think that question asking sort of about day-to-day challenges or some of these like social determinants of health sort of factors in our, where we live, work, and play that impact all of these things, to your point, that was quantified. And so we're able, for the future to sort of slice the data that way or look at that by those specific factors. So I think that was a real benefit of designing the surveys that way as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So as I understand, what you set up also is that Washington State and Clark County specifically has a requirement to integrate this climate component into comprehensive planning. It's like an institutionalizing climate change and various issues on heat and other extremes, I think, locally. So curious about other communities that may not have, pretty much every community outside of Washington State that doesn't have necessarily this mandate and requirement to integrate a climate component into something that's pretty standard, at least bread and butter type of planning documents for Washington State. Do you have any thoughts on how what guidance, suggestions, advice you might give other regions of the country that are thinking about institutionalizing aspects of heat or even other heat and other climate stressors within their planning and public health practices?
Yeah. So again, Amy, I can start, but feel free to jump in with additional ideas. I think we are an example of a local jurisdiction who did no climate planning prior to this state mandate. So, I think we are, and we're in the first wave of implementers in the state of Washington. So this is all very new. So I think this is new, right? It's a new phase of climate planning in places who did not elect to do it on their own, essentially. So, I think we were very thoughtful in the approach and way we were doing this work. And like our first survey, we're like, everyone can talk about the weather, right? I mean, everyone's experienced hot weather, different kinds of weather in the past. So we tried to, be as approachable as we could. We knew we were going to get a really wide range of perspectives in the community that we work with. And at the same time, it was helpful to have a mandate for us, because even if people didn't want us to do this work, we don't have a choice, right? We have it's now written into state law. So there are a combination of factors, and I think could be taken in all sorts of directions. Amy, anything you want to add from your perspective?
Yeah, interesting. That's super interesting. It is going to be a very locally deliberated conversation. Just one quick last one before we open it up to the whole group and also the audience. If you have questions, please, just a reminder, put it in Q&A. We're going to have a little chunk of time afterwards here to ask detailed or broader questions as helpful. Curious, you mentioned that this might provide a baseline for work that you would do in the future, or even any other work that happens. Are there any efforts, attempts, or thoughts about how this particular moment in your sensing of heat by local communities can be compared to something that might happen, let's say 5-10 years down the line, to see if some of the work that you're doing is making a difference or driving some change locally? maybe it's not on the cards yet, but just wanted to check with you about how you might think about that in 5, let's say, 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now.
Yeah, I'm going to buy Amy some time to think about this. And so I will say another part of our state legislation, we have a 5-year mandatory reporting requirement. So we have to be able to report to the state on progress. And they generally have said, think about what you're proposing and how you're going to be able to measure it. But there's still all the guidance from the state on this is still in the works. So we do need to figure out some metrics that we will be able to assess over time. So that is something we need to figure out, but I'm not sure we have quite got into the specifics on that quite yet. But Amy does a lot of data stuff in our public health department. So I don't know if you have anything you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything groundbreaking to add, but evaluation and monitoring are pillars to public health practice. And so I think, yeah, absolutely. It's great to have this robust data set available to us. And I think there could be potential. We haven't had talks about this yet, but potential to either repeat or sort of work with community partners to assess, if there's been change over time. So absolutely.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. So I'd love to invite Lauren and Christian to come back on the screen and just to kind of open up a panel conversation, a few questions, and I'd just leave it up to any of you who feel comfortable responding. We've got 3 different ways of sensing and understanding distribution of heat based on the 4 of you. And I guess when it comes to like local decision makers, practitioners, who are trying to figure out which one of these do I really want, which one of these do I think would be relevant to my jurisdiction or my place. What are your any thoughts on like the conditions, social, environmental, political conditions that would help people decide whether they want to administer a survey, whether they want to use satellite images, whether they want to go out and deploy sensors or conduct a mobile campaign at that. So any thoughts on like when would be or and what conditions would allow for which one of these types of activities? I'm curious your thoughts.
I can start. We've done in New York City the 3 strategies throughout the years, and I guess it just depends on the timing of it. We always say having the right data at the right time is the most important part, and sometimes we don't wait to collect it. Like if we see that there's a need, we have it, and we'll save it in our back pocket for when we do have, a city council or a leader ready to receive the information to move it into policy or legislation. So we provide a lot of the quantitative work. Working with the community, though, we have done a lot of surveys now related to heat because we found that because of the previous work that we've done, like making sure that people know that heat is an important issue in New York, the number of people who go to the emergency room department related to heat events every year, we have to do an annual heat report. So now that it's more information out there, people are more interested in the topic. And so we have done the qualitative side where we've done surveys and tying it to the everyday lives, such as being energy insecure due to heat or not having ACs because you can't afford it or afford to run it. So I think when you deploy each method, it really depends on one, political will, the capacity of whoever is doing it, and then what community partners you can get who are interested.
Great. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Lauren. That's great. Thanks. Jenna, Amy, anything to add to that?
I guess had 2 quick thoughts. One was, while we were doing surveying, trying to get a lot of community feedback, we also are starting to build our more data-based work. Amy's team, anyway, starting to track more heat-related information, things like that. And so I think, both for like planning, we often have to deal with both technical data, but the community input is also super important. So I think we're not just talking to people, but The other thing I would add is for a community like ours, where we are really just starting on climate work, it felt really important for us to make sure we understood what people were already identifying as issues and concerns, right? Like as a starting point, this gave us something to work from and could help inform policies, which will then lead into more detailed work in the future. So if you're at the beginning of your climate planning journey, making sure you're talking to your community seems pretty important.
Yeah, especially when they tell you that heat is the top concern that they have in the survey results. It's really telling. That's great. Amy, anything to add, or
I would just add, I think, other folks said this as well, but just, thinking about secondary data or sort of existing data first is a great starting place. I think we're lucky in our state. We have a lot of statewide data available that we can kind of lean on first and supplement with other resources. But yeah, definitely capacity dependent, and a lot of these projects can take a lot of time. So.
Great. And I will just quickly note there's some Q&As in here, and I'd love to have, looks like Lauren and Jenna and Amy maybe respond to a couple of them that are very specific related to methodology. And so that would be great if you could just type an answer into that, if you can access that. And I want to ask a couple of broader questions that have popped up as well in terms of, for example, before and after, maybe Lauren, I wonder if, you deploy these sensors, and not to say that you need to go out and do another 500 sensor deployment, which is not in the cards, but how does one, I guess it's really about how does one describe or quantify or even characterize the differences that some action has as a result of the data you collect? Like with satellite imagery, since they're so frequent, and as Christian was saying, is like a very set and kind of systematic imagery that exists. And so when some activity happens, and a lot of municipalities are taking action on this through whether it be albedo, changing the reflectivity, or they're putting in trees, or they're changing the configuration of buildings and things like that when they're designing and developing for heat. How do you have any sense for kind of understanding the impact or the results or the potential implications of whether it worked well or not? How would you use some of the tools and techniques that you're describing to describe that or quantify that or characterize that?
Yeah, so we do a lot of modeling. So we have this, that's why we call it a baseline. And so we're able to use some of the satellite data, some of the neighborhood variables, some of the other data layers that New York City has. New York City is blessed to have a lot of, to be data rich. So we have a lot of data that's collected through various agencies. So we have building type data, topography type data, and we created models. So we're able to actually predict like if the trees grow at this rate and it's this canopy cover over the street, like what the temperature reduction should be. And so you could do less measurements the next time because you would only have to validate a few areas with that modeling data in the future. So we've done a lot of land use correlations, and I do before and after mitigation for small mitigation efforts such as shading through artificial structures or the misting tents or the other smaller heat interventions block-wide every summer. So not only through the air temperature monitors, through thermal imagery as well.
Gotcha. Great. So very empirical, like on the ground assessments, but then also some modeling work that helps you kind of figure out whether you're trending and moving in the right direction. Of course. Great. I want to, just to kind of build on some of the questions coming in the Q&A as well. And this may be relevant to Jenna and Amy specifically, but anyone can feel free to jump in. There's a question about strategies for kind of outreach and engagement of heat risks, especially to vulnerable communities. What have you found to be more effective in terms of being able to reach those communities that are some way disproportionately impacted by heat? And does any of your work kind of point to some promising practices?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think working with those community-based organizations was very significant for us, right? They are embedded in their communities, know them well, were able to work with us and help shape, right, the types of questions we asked, how they were framed, things like that. And them doing the outreach, right? It meant they were talking to people who trusted them, as opposed to random government worker trying to ask, someone questions. So, that was super significant. We were lucky to have grant funding from the state that let us pursue that kind of approach, which we wanted to try out. And then I think something else that we did this, we sort of developed this with that group, was when we did these surveys, we knew it's asking a lot for people to spend 10, 20 minutes answering survey questions, right? That we didn't want to bug them too much. So in our surveys, we usually had some intro information that was sharing back like where we're at, what we'd heard from the previous survey. We were trying to use the tool to do a few different things, right? If people wanted to know that we'd heard them already, there was information in there. And then, we also did a little bit of education in the survey. We'd share, but tried not to overwhelm, like in our community, we're expecting to see more hot days, and then you'd ask a question, right? So you give a little bit of background there. So I think that was key. And then the one other thing that's coming to mind right now is we did a lot of translation, and I had not quite budgeted initially for the amount of translation that we did, but working with these community organizations, they were like, can you please translate into this language? Because my community speaks that language, right? So we tried to be as accommodating as we could to get these community organizations the resources and information they needed to be able to more effectively do the outreach. So I think that went a long way, especially we have a large Pacific Island community here where the Pacific Islands don't just speak one language. There are many languages spoken across the islands, right? So that was a lot of languages, and it was really important that the information was available to them. So that became important in order to even, engage with them.
Thanks. That's really helpful to hear. Amy, anything else?
I was just going to add, it may be kind of intuitive, but we've been finding too that seasonality is really important. Like the time at which you spread awareness about heat or start talking about heat can be really important, because, if that messaging is in the winter, it's really not going to stick as much as, early summer, or if like something in recent memory comes to mind, or spring. So I'll just add that as well. That's been really cool.
That's great to hear. Yeah, thank you. Those are helpful. CBOs, translation, seasonality. Kind of almost like setting it up for a response with the question itself, question design itself. Really good. That tees up next week's webinar really well. Before I get into that, just maybe one more question, since I have the privilege of having you all here. I'm thinking about like a municipal planner or a public health practitioner, somebody on the ground who is thinking about the way they can show heat in a very tangible, very real way for the communities they serve. And the idea being really like, how do I compel folks to take action on this? And it's something that heat claims more lives every year than any other natural hazard, and it's something that often goes under the radar. We'll be talking about beyond heat alerts next time, though kind of really getting some of these sensing, trying to think about how to use the sensors, the satellites, the surveys, the engagement in a way that makes it as real to folks as possible. This is something I hear all the time. Like people love talking about heat, but boy, it's hard to take action on it. So it's something that we think about a lot on the CAPA team, and just trying to make it as real for folks as possible. From your experience and doing sensing work, in what ways have you found that to be potentially helpful for local community members to give a hoot?
Okay, I'll take a stab at this. I do talk to a lot of community members, and it's something that, I struggle with still after doing this for a decade. Um, I think it's very hard to explain to people the temperature, because air temperature differences are smaller than surface temperature differences, and it's very hard to describe in layman's term what a 1 degree air temperature change means. For our overall climate goals in the world, we're trying to do 1.5 or 2 degrees, whatever you think about it, but it's very hard to then how do people think about that in their everyday lives. And so that's why we've been exploring over the past couple of years this we've been doing a lot of qualitative things and explaining what heat means to people inside their homes, or what heat means to people outside. So whether you're the thermal stress conditions like loss of productivity, dehydration, and how quickly heat distress can come upon a person, and then also inside their homes, like not being able to afford to get cool. What do you do to get cool? How does that impact your food decision, your bringing friends to your house decisions, the monetary decisions that you use for your kids or other family members? So doing it on those relations. So the air temperature data and the technical stuff is really good for grants and and city officials and policy and things like that. But conveying and having people care about it, who are everyday citizens, is a whole nother social science ballgame. And so that's why we've been collecting stories. We have a heat stories page that's up on our website now, so we can collect some heat stories and trying to translate like what everyday changes are impacted by heat.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lauren. That's great. If you could put a link to that heat stories link in chat, or at least, yeah, if you could post it, that would be great. That sounds like a great resource, and also segueing really nicely into our second webinar next week, which is going to be focusing on engaging hard to reach populations around heat. Unless there are any other thoughts or responses from the panelists, I think we'll switch to just closing us out with the next session coming up next Thursday. Thanks, Zachary, for putting this up. Really excited to have folks from Houston, from Washington County, Oregon, and another Northwest public housing and indoor heat conversation happening next week. Delighted to have Carmen, Highland, and Dana presenting on July 17th at 12 p.m. Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm really looking forward to this. And as a segue from what we talked about in terms of the hard data and kind of understanding sensing of heat, to now kind of how do we actually start working with folks. And these folks have some excellent examples, very practical, in line with what we're doing with these cooling conversations. We want to really be solutions oriented. We want to be practical, and we're really hoping to just fill a gap in ongoing conversations nationally right now that I'm picking up on, and that I really think we have a lot of opportunity to keep the conversation going, because again, this is very timely, very seasonal, and something that we want to keep our eye on. So please follow. There's a LinkedIn, Instagram. There's also a Climate Current newsletter that's coming out in August 2025, which will follow on from this series of webinars, which I'm very excited about. There'll be local case studies. There'll be examples of projects that are underway to tackle, yes, extreme heat, but also a lot of other natural hazards and climate stressors that are affecting communities. So thank you all for joining. Thank you especially to the panelists, Christian, Lauren, Jenna, and Amy, for your wonderful, insightful thoughts and presentations. And we'll be following up for those who registered with a recording, as well as some resources that the panelists have assembled and that the CAPA team has assembled. So unless I'm missing anything else, I will sign us out here and wish you a great rest of your Thursday. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.